Hi all, welcome to Build It Green's Mix and Match, Building Housing Solutions One Card at a Time event. I'm Serena Harrison, Director of Program Implementation over at Build It Green, and I have the pleasure to introduce you to the toolkit created by design firms LMNOP and all of the above. We're excited to spotlight the Mix and Match project as a 2024 Innovation Fund awardee. A bit of background about the fund. Build It Green launched the network's Innovation Fund, marking a major milestone for our work and making available a total of $200,000 in grants for transformative projects across California and Build It Green's network. It provides seed funding to projects that demonstrate potential in three pillars: transformational impacts, collaboration, and regeneration and equity. Designers Ben Hoffman and Janette Kim will now walk you through the history of the project and introduce the toolkit with some live play. And we want to note throughout the session, we encourage you to drop any questions or reflections in the chat. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Ben so we can dive in with our session today.
Thank you, Serena. Hi, everyone. I'm Ben Hoffman. I am a junior designer at LMNOP, where I work closely with community members of Plumas County, which is a small kind of rural county in Northern California, for about 2 years now. Post-Dixie Fire, one of the largest wildfires in California history, we were sort of tasked with sort of developing and advocating for some pretty complex solutions to complex problems, and housing became a huge focus. And then with me is Janette Kim. Janette Kim is the founder of the design practice All of the Above. She's also a professor of architecture at California College of the Arts. She's designed 2 different board games that state agencies and community groups have used to navigate climate change adaptation. And we've been working together on Mix and Match for, I guess, a little bit under a year. This is a community-based game. It helps to sort of ease the complexity of conversations around housing development and ownership, while also giving community groups and entities agency. We sort of have 3 major goals with it: demystifying the sort of like strategies and hurdles that come with community-centered housing development and housing development in general, and then democratizing these kind of solutions towards something that can be developed by a community, and then also sort of building that knowledge, understanding what tools are out there and what is most viable for our community. A little background. Well, I want to thank Big for the support. They've been with us since really early on, early last year. It began as a response to the Plumas County sort of need for attainable workforce housing. After the Dixie Fire, they lost a significant portion of their already severely exasperated kind of housing stock. So this was designed as a response there, and to sort of help inform community stakeholders and also ease the understanding of the complexity of the problem that they have kind of been tasked with facing. And then also sort of start to pair tools together. So Big came in as kind of in the initial support there, along with our original funder, the LMNOP Foundation. And we're now sort of in phase 2, which is kind of looking at more of a statewide rollout outside of our really rural community. So thanks to Big's Innovative Fund, we're sending this out to community members and expanding its impact at a state level. We'll sort of start by providing moderator workshops starting next year, and then also provide games on loan. You can see this sort of physical version of the game pieces to the right there. And with that, I want to pass it over to Janette, who will sort of walk us through how to play the game before we get to play a little.
Hi, everyone. So glad you're here. Thank you for joining. My goal today is to give you a taste of the game. I'll introduce you to it generally, and then we'll do a demo with you at the same time. So this is what the game typically looks like. We would take about 1.5 hours to play. We'd set up a series of tables with around 5 people sitting around one game at each table. But today, since we're online with a shorter amount of time, we thought we'd do something that's a little bit like a cooking show, where like the pie has already been baked, but we're also going to like actually make parts of it with you along the way. In other words, Ben and I have preset a couple of turns of the game already, and then we'll invite you to kind of join in and give us your opinion about how we should make decisions at particular moments along the way. But first, before we dive in, I'll give you a general introduction. Here you're seeing a kind of rough overview of the overall game. The general goal of the game is for players to design a housing solution that works best for their community. The goal here is less to win something and more to kind of spark a more creative conversation. So players begin by defining their goals over here, and then they use this deck of tool cards down here to accomplish their goals by placing them on the board here. So players can basically like mix and match different tool cards along the way to figure out what kind of housing seems to work best for them. I'll give you a sense of what these tool card categories are like. So in purple, the tools could help people define what kind of housing they'd like to live in. And then in teal and with the teal cards, which talk about ownership arrangements, and green cards, which talk about where to get money for all of this. These two cards show how people pay for housing, who might profit from it, if at all, and who might handle any risks as they come up. The orange tool cards talk about how things are made, and then the blue cards, which talk about governance, determine who makes decisions. So just to give you a really quick example, if you were to play mix and match around my mom's house, it might look something like this. My mom lives in a suburban home built in the 70s, just outside of LA. And to reach, for example, my parents' goal of building wealth and having a kind of stability in their own livelihood, we could see that they've chosen, a single family home that they own outright with a 30-year mortgage. So I think this is very common, perhaps too common, but we see, I think you'll see that this is one of many options that a person could design with this game. So as I mentioned, let's go into a little bit more detail. As I mentioned, the first step is to define your goals. And so we have this kind of checklist of different goals that people could seek out with housing. And we usually invite the players to just write a short description of what they want to accomplish over here. This is kind of the pre-baked pie part of this. So Ben and I went ahead and wrote this description just to set the stage for us. I should say, typically this step is quite intensive in gameplay. People take quite a lot of time to just chat and kind of, negotiate amongst themselves what they think their priorities are. But for today, we've set up this goal and we hope you are interested in this as well. We know that you come from all over the state and we all have really different experiences of housing, but hopefully this relates to you. Okay, so imagine this context. We live in a neighborhood of single-family homes that is close to nearby shops and restaurants, but too expensive for people who work in the area to afford. The county just changed the zoning laws to allow for up to 4 units on each property. So what do we want to do? Ben and I suggest that our goal, all of us together as our team, is to create housing that connects neighbors of different ages and backgrounds together. We're assuming that the residents of this area, of this housing project, want to own our own homes, but want to also make sure to keep this affordable for future generations. So I think there are many ways to accomplish that. We've pre-selected these goals here. So for audience, we might look at this mix of low income and multi-generational residents. For sociability, we can aim for a strong sense of cultural cohesion. For kind of place and ecological impacts, we could aim for a walkable neighborhood. And then these last 2 sections talk a little bit more about how we balance our values in relationship to some of the logistics and hurdles of creating housing. So in terms of realization, Ben and I thought we could focus on emphasizing consensus, meaning that the residents themselves have a sense of involvement in decision-making, as opposed to, for example, putting like cost or speed as our highest priority, because sometimes building consensus can take time. And then in terms of economics, Although I know these are not mutually exclusive, sometimes one has to choose between building wealth versus keeping housing affordable long-term. So we've decided to prioritize long-term affordability here. All right, so we hope you are interested in these goals too, and that we could all use them together to guide us as we play. Okay, but before we play, I'll just give you a little bit more preview of how it works. So now that, players, and in our case, us, we have our goals, the players can then sort of put these cards down on the board. We usually ask people to put like one card at a time, and then get together again and say like, okay, how is this working out? Are we achieving our goals, or is there something we're missing? And then that's when people have an opportunity to kind of mix and match, pull something out, combine different tools together, and really start to customize the board to work for them. And then once people are satisfied with that process, they can come over here and write like a name for their housing project and a short description of what they've accomplished. And then if they'd like, they can also like draw on the bottom of the board how they think this housing project will feel and look. Okay, so that's the kind of preview overall. Now, I hope you understand that generally. I think we can go ahead and just dive in and start playing as a group. And so I'll just
Hey,
remind you.
Janette,
Yeah,
Lonnie had some really great questions that I'd like to sort of
perfect.
call out before we start pulling into the gameplay. Lonnie asked, and clarify here too, do we only pick one in each of the goals, or do we sometimes select more?
It's really up to the group. Usually we'll ask people to start by just choosing one, because sometimes it's a lot of cards to take in at one time. So usually we'll start with just one card from each category, but then once we can assess and look at all of the different cards together, then we might say like, oh, let's add this one in and combine it in, or let's swap this one with that one. So it's very, very flexible. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, and Lonnie asked another question. How do you get the players to maybe sort of feel like they want to try something new or something different? Is that the right question, Lonnie?
Yes, it is the question. How do we get them thinking outside the box?
Yeah, that's great.
That's a great question. I think I find that sometimes the fact that it's a game already helps to get people to sort of think, okay, I'm going to just try this out. Uh, and I think the combination of cards is pretty wide ranging. So I'm hoping that helps people kind of imagine things they might not otherwise have chosen. But if you also feel that you're playing in a situation where people have a tendency to kind of, dig their heels in and say, I know what's best, it could also be helpful to do some kind of role play and ask people to choose situations that they're not typically engaged with, or even to say like, imagine that you are this kind of person, that people typically do not represent. And that might help just like kind of open up people's minds a little bit.
I think another thing too that we really try to encourage is that this is a game of sort of trial and error and not a game of a direct solution for something that you win, right? So that goes back to Janette's point about kind of trying things out, seeing what sticks and what doesn't work, and being creative with it.
Thanks, Lonnie. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
All right. So just to recap, if we are designing housing in this formerly single-family home neighborhood, why don't we as a group go through this category by category and just choose some cards, and then we can step back and see whether we like what we've done. So let's start with housing. And you'll see that the cards have a wide range. We could see something from a manufactured home to a single row housing to live-worked lofts to tiny homes. For the sake of our neighborhood, Ben and I thought we could choose these 3 cards and open this to a vote for all of you. So we'd like to hear your thoughts about which of these housing models you think would suit our goals best. So we've identified these 3 options. So let's look at these. I'm sure you're probably mostly familiar with this, but a pocket neighborhood would be something like a series of individual homes that are clustered together, often around a common open space. And in the physical game, these would be physical cards. And so if you flip over the card, you would see a photo like this that gives you a sense of what a pocket neighborhood looks like. And then the second option would be ADUs, or accessory dwelling units, which could add housing units through smaller scale freestanding or perhaps attached buildings, or sometimes even created in the attic or some other space within the home. So the example might look like that. And then as a third option, we could look at multifamily housing. In other words, just more than 2 attached dwelling units on one property. And so we have examples like this here. Okay, so I'm curious to hear what you think. Ben's going to open a poll. You should see a pop-up window on your screen, and please share your thoughts with us on that poll. Okay, we have results. Thank you to everybody who participated. We had 100% return on all voters. It's always a good sign. And so we see 50% of you, which is the highest vote, would like to see multifamily housing. 25% of you wanted to see ADUs, and 19% of you wanted to see pocket housing, pocket neighborhoods. So I see we see a strong emphasis on density here in this crowd. Let's go for it. Okay, so whoops. Like that. So multifamily housing is it. It's happening. Now let's move on to the ownership category. And here, if you don't mind, oh, I see a raised hand. Oh, sorry. Darren, would you like to unmute yourself and say something?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, Janet, if you're not really looking for questions, but I thought I'd ask anyways, and let me know if you want to do it differently or hold to the end. But I'm curious, the benefits of picking one. My initial inclination is we want all of that. And I know that sometimes is not necessarily a good thing for communities to think. But I wonder if what the purpose of actually picking one, I think sometimes we try to overly prescribe the solutions rather than enabling a wide variety of solutions. So I was just curious your thoughts on that.
I think that's a great point about who's playing this game, because if, for example, you were to bring this game out to community groups, then I think it's important for those folks to sort of have have their say as they're debating and discussing. I think for now, if it's okay, I think one thing that's kind of fun is just to have a few cards on the board and know that they're not fixed in stone, And so once we put the cards on board, then we might say, now that we've looked at the financing, we could see that this kind of housing might actually work better for us. So if you don't mind, maybe we can kind of keep running through our thoughts. And then in a few moments, we can also come back and just like really reassess and move things around however we want. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks.
So regarding ownership, I think this is one of these pre-baked categories. So Ben and I pre-selected 2 categories, 2 tools here that we thought seemed especially supportive of this idea that our people want to own their own home. And so I would like to suggest these 2 categories. My cat is meowing at me. Okay. So the first category is a ground lease. In other words, this would be a way to help people own land cooperatively. And as I'm sure many of you know, the idea of a ground lease is to allow multiple people to own land together cooperatively, while individuals or individual families might own the individual buildings on top of this land. And this is a structure that's often used in community land trusts. And so that's one tool that we'd like to place. And then another tool is limited equity. Because we're really focused on long-term affordability here, we thought we would ask the residents to agree to resell their home at a price that's below market rate in order to make sure that future buyers can afford this housing as well. So we hope you're also interested in that. And I'll just put these down here. And then again, remember, we are all welcome to mix and match these later as we go. Okay. And hearing a question, limited equity can happen with the ground lease, only pick one. Yeah, let's open that discussion later. I thought for now, I know, for example, many CLTs are combining those 2 ideas. So we thought we could give that a shot here. All right, so now we move on to our third category, which is money. And here we'd like to open the floor to your input, just as we did with housing. And so Ben and I have decided we'd like to focus on these 5 categories. And I have a feeling with the Build It Green group that there are a lot of experts on money in the room. So please give us your thoughts. In a moment, we'll open a poll for these 5 options. And the 5 options are to apply for grants from nonprofits or other organizations. The second is to talk to the government, local city, county, et cetera, federal agencies, to talk about transferring land over to us. The third option is to solicit existing homeowners or to work with existing homeowners to contribute their property to this new project. The fourth option is to use a community investment fund. In other words, a way of raising capital from community-based investors who would then receive a share of income, for example, as rental income, or it could be any other kind of income as well. And then the fifth option is sweat equity, which enables future homeowners to have a reduced cost, perhaps in exchange for their contribution of construction labor or other kinds of labor, such as like organization or outreach or things like that. All right, so curious to hear your thoughts. You should see a poll pop up pretty soon. Beautiful. Thank you everyone for voting. The very first choice is a community investment fund. And that was a 56% vote. And the second option, the second most popular option was the government land transfer, which received 44% vote. And then there were 2 other close ones. So the grants and the sweat equity both received 31%. And then the existing property was like much lower down with 13%. Actually, I'm kind of curious, for the people who voted for government contributions, I wonder if you could describe the reasons for that in the chat. Oh, sorry, community investment was the top one. So these 2. My mistake. If anyone wants to describe either of those choices, that would be great. I'm really curious to hear. Well, I'm going to keep going. And then if we see some thoughts pop up about that, that would be great. Thank you, Lonnie, for that thought. That parking lots and facilities not being used by local governments could be donated. And while we're seeing if any other thoughts come up, I'll just keep moving to the other 2 categories. So I think from Florentine, we see, I think it would be quite controversial to have government land transfer to individual ownership. Yes, that's a really great point. And from Julia, are we limited to the 4 units per property allowed by the county? Yes, I think that's a really good assumption. And then maybe there's this thought that, well, you know, could government funding contributions work if there's a nonprofit builder? And then speaking to the community investment trust or fund, this legitimizes community ownership and broader support for this approach. I also believe that these are 2 most important sources of funding and land for these projects. Thank you. I love these contributions. They're so fascinating. Okay, so we have 2 more categories to look at. We'll move through these much more quickly, and that way we can open up a little more time for discussion. So regarding construction, Ben and I thought we could just focus on this idea of supporting women and minority-owned contractors. And then regarding governance, we thought we could focus on these 2 tools. One, which has to do with collective decision-making. You know, as you may remember in our original goals, there was people really wanted to have a strong sense of consensus. And so we thought this was important. But then also to start to connect this housing project that we're all designing together to its larger community. We also identified this feature, which is common in a community land trust, as you probably know, which is to reserve a seat on the board for a community member, not a local resident within the housing project, but a kind of community member at large. So we can definitely change these later, open to discussion, but for now, let's put these down on the board. Okay. So we've now placed one tool card per category on the board, but these are definitely not fixed in stone. So we thought we could just open this to a larger discussion. If it's okay, I think anybody who'd like to speak, maybe you could just unmute yourself or maybe raise your hand first and then I'll call on you and we could have a conversation that way. So we would just love to hear your thoughts. What have we done? Does this work? Is it not working so well? So maybe we could just start by even thinking, okay, you know, we've got these goals on the side. What kinds of impacts do we think we're doing really well with? Are there any that we haven't quite addressed yet with these tools?
I think the main question I would have, or the first one that's coming up for me is the low income. Are we setting this up to be affordable for low income folks, which I think is a challenge with any of the housing development. But I feel like generally you need some kind of subsidy in order to make it affordable. So I wonder about that.
Yeah. I wonder if that means that we might want to go down here and like pull the grant thing in, or, you know, is sweat equity useful, for example, because people might not have to come up with a big down payment, or is rent to own useful because it allows people to sort of have a lower rent while they're building up to equity over time. Does anyone have any thoughts about, I hope you can read some of these cards. Does anybody have any thoughts about other tools that they think they might want to add into the mix?
I mean, I think a grant would be great if they could get it.
I'm going to add that to the board. That seems suitable.
I mean, if we're looking at home ownership opportunities, then, which I'm not totally sure, I got the sense we were, but these are existing homeowners who are playing this game. So that we already own our homes, but I'm assuming we want the folks who are we're creating space in the community for to also own. I think that's the context. Then things like sweat equity have been kind of a proven model. But it doesn't necessarily fit with the existing property choice, which is one of the ones I had made because I thought we were actually talking about a context where we didn't necessarily have other land available. And we were looking at how we could utilize our own homes to help achieve this goal. But that's just how the frame I put it in, not that there was anything that was said that
because, for
requires
example,
that.
Yeah, what I hear you saying too is like, for example, if we combined ADUs with the donation of existing property, or I don't know if donation is the right word, but the contribution of existing properties, these two together could actually allow us to keep existing homeowners in place while densifying slowly over time. Is that accurate, Julie?
Yeah, exactly.
Is anyone interested in doing that instead of multifamily housing, or would you say, no, you know, or actually maybe those two can go together. Like maybe we can build up to multifamily housing over time, or just curious to hear people's thoughts about that.
I think for me, I like that idea, but also for me, it would be based off of like, what is our goal in terms of the number of people that we want housed?
Yeah.
I think that if we go with like multifamily housing, then yes, we're going to be able to house more people sooner rather than if we use existing properties and then we're only able to add an ADU, which will probably be smaller, may not be able to have like a family, but maybe more like individuals or seniors, or maybe a couple, but it'll be less people versus like the multifamily housing.
Do you think that means a pocket neighborhood might be something at a middle scale? I guess I'm hearing in your comment that maybe we want to have more than, for example, just 2 units or just 3 units, which an ADU might allow.
Janette, this is Lonnie. This sort of harkens back to what Darren was saying, that selecting one type of housing to meet these goals. What if we were to work from the idea of some ideal new residents in the neighborhood in the context? So, you know, let's say we were to say as one of the goals, I would like my kids to be able to join me in this neighborhood in the future. Or I have my kids who want it, and I also have my mother who needs to come and be closer to me. That will start to direct a mix of housing types that we can then add into this, as opposed to just picking one to reach a goal.
I love that. And I completely forgot to say that we have blanks here. So we
Oh,
can just write
okay.
in or draw exactly what we want to see. Yeah, I think that's really critical.
But I think, almost another column
Hmm.
that starts to talk about, we'd like first responders in our neighborhood. We'd like college students in our neighborhood. Maybe we also need to talk about the I don't want it to be too limiting, but in the idea of who are we missing in our neighborhood who needs to be here?
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely. And I think that is where hopefully we can start to customize these tools, and we can go back and like redraw our goals to actually, start to realize that our goals might have been, for example, to bring in elderly and youth, to understand that in a more specific way. I think that our hope at least is that this can help us visualize that. So I know there are some comments that I haven't yet had a chance to read yet, so I apologize to not get to them more explicitly. But for the sake of time, I want to just wrap up a few thoughts, and then Ben can also, Ben's going to kind of talk a little bit about big picture questions. So as I mentioned earlier, I think one goal is to come over here and actually describe like, what did we do? So I guess I'm going to just at least say in here that I'm seeing the possibility for a kind of multi-generational community. Actually, Ben, do you mind writing this in for me? I can't quite get the text right. But if you want to have like a multi-generational community that has flexible housing options, let's say. One thing I do want to show you is that one feature of this game is that we made this little dice, which is kind of a scenario dice. And once you're done kind of naming what you've just designed, you can then come in and see how it works and play out some of the impacts of these features that we've just selected. So for example, you could roll the dice and you could say, what happens if there's a change in population, or a need for maintenance, or a natural disaster, or a change in interest rates or something like that. And so what you could do is kind of roll the dice and then have a discussion about whether you feel that the housing model you've just designed works well within that kind of scenario. So that's kind of one way of testing whether your preconceptions really did align with kind of reality. And then maybe just one more feature I want to describe here is that I think while we've been talking, Ben has been kind of sketching to imagine this kind of new community that could happen here. And so this is just one way of starting to connect to what we're attempting to design together. All right. So with that, I think I'll kind of wrap up this demo part and hand things back to Ben to kind of wrap up. I appreciate all of your comments. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, thank you all for taking the time to sort of not only provide feedback to our version of the game, but also the game as a whole and as a concept for communities. I think one asset that we haven't really covered, and I think we threw you guys into the deep end of the swimming pool a little bit. And I appreciate you guys kind of going through that. One of the challenges that, because of how much information is, it can be a bit challenging for communities or people, even folks who are kind of well educated on portions of home ownership and housing development. There might still be a large lack, which is why, if you don't mind, hop into the next slide. We've developed a deck or a series of case studies. One of them that you can see on there is EV Prec. I saw someone from EV Prec here, so thanks for joining and thanks for providing such a critical example for us. I'd love for you to maybe take a look sometime at how we envisioned your model reflects within the game. Yeah, and so part of the goal there is to maybe perhaps as we're kind of getting stuck in the game, to turn to this case studies book and look at folks who have developed real world solutions, who might have similar goals or who might have used similar tools, and maybe show what other pairings they did, how else they mixed and matched their game board, but also maybe who to look to. So, we might be like, oh, this is kind of like a community land trust. Are there any local or kind of neighboring community land trusts that we can look into? I hope the theory is that this is a kind of tool to sort of think about what's next, as I believe Lonnie had mentioned. So up next, we would love if you could fill out this interest form. That will allow us to sort of stay in contact with you, provide a recording of this game and our finished game board. It also allows for us to sort of engage further, whether that's sort of about developing the game to as we move forward, or requesting a loaner set to play within your own community, or joining moderator training sessions, which I think gets to kind of Florentine's comment that you need someone who can sort of summarize the narrative that we've arrived at. The hope is the moderators, as you play this game, are an asset to not only understand the tools to a degree, but also sort of be able to summarize big picture. So again, if you don't mind filling out that interest form, that'll really help us kind of get to understand what was hitting, what wasn't working, and also kind of stay in touch a little bit.
I also just want to say your feedback is really helpful. And I think
Yeah.
I could imagine, for example, editing the cards to be a bit more intuitive and less technical so that people can say, okay, I'm just generally interested in the idea of collective ownership, but we don't need to give it this particular name. Or, I think there are ways to make the concepts, to foreground the concepts over the technicalities. So anyway, that's one example of something that I think we could also start to adjust. And we'd love to, if anyone's interested in using this game or applying, folding it into techniques they already use, we'd love to work with you to kind of make those modifications to make it helpful for you. So yeah, we'd love to hear from you. Serena, do you want to wrap up?
Yeah, I'll close us out. Just really echo lots of appreciation for everyone who was able to join us. And thank you, Ben and Janette, for running through this game. I think it clearly sparked a lot of curiosity, in me. Where does this go forward? And the interest form is linked in the chat, as well as we'll have some follow-up with it as well, so you won't lose this. We'll also have the recording and a blog recap available in the next week or so. So stay posted, everyone, and thanks again for joining us. And please reach out to the team if you have any questions.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you all.
Thanks everyone. All.